Okay, we have made it to chapter 30. So many exciting things have happened up to this point. But what is currently happening is that Gerta and her older brother Fritz are digging a tunnel. They are digging a tunnel to freedom. They received a message from their father that had a drawing of a building, and he had indicated that he wanted them to dig. And they found this building, which they're calling the Welcome Building, and it's a building that butts right up against the Berlin Wall, and they're currently digging and at this point are somewhere beneath the death strip. So they're trying to dig, and all along the way they've run into so many different obstacles and issues, right? Like first of all, since they're right there digging near the wall, what can they do to make it appear that they're not digging? They're running into all of these things with soldiers being right there, and then at one point soldiers actually come and visit the Welcome Building, and they're asking them questions and all of these things. There are also just the difficulty of them trying to dig. It is very, very tiresome work to dig this tunnel, and then also what to do with the dirt. And then at one point, in order to haul the dirt, Gerta realizes that they need a pulley, and so she has to figure out some way of getting one. And then they also have the issue of hiding what they're doing from neighbors and from friends. They come up with this facade telling people that they are actually creating a garden. And that's, kind of explains away all the dirt hauling and then being covered with dirt and, really muddy and dirty at the end of each day. But the problem with that then is one neighbor wants to come and see the garden. Anna, Gerta's best friend, wants to come and help them with the garden. So they run into all of these obstacles as well. And then finally, at this point that we're at right now, Fritz and Gerta are in the tunnel, and they see a light approaching, a flashlight. Somebody is coming down the tunnel toward them, and lo and behold, who is it? Officer Mueller, one of the officers of the Stasi. So all of these crazy obstacles, you guys, it's so intense. What do we call that when events happen in a story that add to the tension and they complicate the conflict, right? Like, oh, we're starting to dig this tunnel, but oh no, what do we do with all the dirt? And oh, we're still digging this tunnel, but oh no, our neighbor is getting really nosy. And what do they call those events that occur that complicate the conflict? We call it the rising action. Good. So hopefully you've noticed that all along the way throughout these chapters, there have been many, many rising action events that have added to the intensity of this story. And you guys, it is fantastic. So good times. Let's jump right into this. We're going to read this German proverb that says, caught together, hanged together. And just a reminder, have your annotation sheet nearby. Take notes whenever needed. Here we go. It felt like hours before any of us spoke. Mueller took his time investigating the tunnel, running his hands along the sides and poking at the ceiling to check how solid it was above us. Okay, before we go further, you might recall who Mueller is. He visited the Welcome Building along with another officer not too long ago. They just kind of poked around outside, and neither of them actually went inside. Gerta was able to convince them that it was just an abandoned building next to their garden, right? Well, obviously he's come back to investigate further. But then prior to that, Officer Mueller was the one who was at the wall the day that Gerta saw her father and her brother Dominic. And he was very threatening to her, the officer was. He put a gun up into her face, right? And was threatening her to never come near the wall again. So this is not a friendly guy. This is the enemy, guys, and he has come into their territory. He is there in the tunnel, and we don't know what he's about right here. A part of me hoped the ceiling would collapse directly above him, but of course that meant we'd be trapped too, and the death strip would cave in on all of us. Not much of a solution. You've gone a long way, Mueller said, farther than I expected. Okay, just want to point out that Officer Mueller, for all his faults, he uses the correct word, the correct term here. He uses farther when he's referring to distance instead of further, which means when you're thinking of figurative distance. So the actual distance would be farther. You knew we were tunneling? Fritz asked. How? I knew there was a reason. Your sister didn't want me getting close to this building. But I didn't really become suspicious until I looked inside the basement yesterday. I saw the pulley and the bucket and asked myself why so much fresh dirt might be in a building that is supposed to be closed up. Okay, so they thought they had him fooled, right? But clearly not. Okay, we're at the top of page 194. Oh, I could have kicked myself, or preferably kicked him. I knew he'd gotten close to the windows, but never thought he'd seen so much. In hindsight, that was plain stupidity on my part, just childish optimism in the face of reality. Mueller ordered us out of the tunnel, but told us not to climb the ladder up to the surface. Fritz dropped the shovel handle, then walked first with his hands held high, and I followed. Mueller went last, keeping the gun trained on us. If he shot, I hoped he would get me first. Maybe that was selfish, but I didn't want to go through watching it happen to Fritz, knowing I was next. Okay, can you imagine being in that position where you're in such a dire position that you're actually hoping that you would get shot first? Wow. So obviously, Goethe and Fritz are very scared, and they have cause to be. Once we were in the shelter, Mueller ordered us to sit on the small bench. He stood beside the ladder, and here, under a little more light, I saw the gun all too well. Okay, go ahead and try to make a text to self connection. Have you ever been in a situation where you actually feared for your life? Have you ever been in a situation where you're worried that this might be your last day? So maybe you have a text to self connection to make there, or if not a text to self connection, maybe a text to text connection. Is there another story that you've read where the character's life is in peril? Or perhaps you can think of a text to world connection where you can think of some other situations where there have been people in the world, maybe, in history or maybe in the news that have faced really perilous conditions. Okay, so those are all good connections for what's going on with Goethe right now. No trial is required before I shoot you, he said. You are clearly guilty of attempting to leave the country. Yes, we were. Not even the best told lie could get us out of this one. I was first alerted to you by a woman who lives in your building, Frau Eberhard. Do you know her? Okay, do we know her, guys? Okay, what do we know about Frau Eberhard? What kind of a lady is she? Yeah, if you're saying she's nosy or she is a busybody or she's a gossip, you would be right about all three of those things. And she's their neighbor. And remember, during, in communism, a lot of times the government will pay people to inform on their neighbors, to basically tattle on them and say, hey, you got to watch out for these guys. They're not supporting communism, right? So Goethe and her family has been nervous that Frau Eberhard is one of those people. Yeah, I knew her and suddenly loathed her just as much as I did Officer Mueller. Okay, if you don't know what the word loathed means, make an inference. Okay, we know that Frau Eberhard is nosy and she's caused problems for Goethe. And we also know Officer Mueller has. So what does loathed mean? Yeah, very similar to hated, right? Those are synonyms. Maybe that was unfair. The Stasi would give her much needed rewards in exchange for information. And after all, she was on the right side of the law, not us. But still, she had betrayed us, and nothing was so low as that. Top of page 195. Frau Eberhard says she first noticed your odd behavior in the week before school got out. Is that how long you've been tunneling? Yes, sir. There was no point in denying that. And how long until you expected to cross into the West? There's no way to know, Fritz said. We're not sure how much farther we have to go, or what conditions we might encounter along the way. You're not the first to attempt an escape through tunnels, Mueller said. Why did you think you would succeed when nearly all attempts have failed? We didn't know if we'd get across, I said. We only knew that we had to try. But now, with 2 shots of my gun, you will be nothing but failed escapees. Your bodies will be buried in shame. Your mother will be arrested and likely jailed, and your names will be published in every newspaper and throughout all history as traitors and cowards. We're neither, sir. Fritz held his head up, clearly determined that if Mueller was going to shoot us, it wouldn't be with us acting ashamed for what we had done. Our country is Germany, one country that should be reunited. We don't belong to Moscow or to the West. We belong to ourselves, and I have never betrayed that. This tunnel has taken every ounce of courage we have. We're not cowards. Okay, Fritz is probably my favorite character. This is such a great speech from him. And in the face of Officer Mueller, who is, carrying a loaded weapon. Top of page 196. That seemed to entertain Mueller. And so, how would you have yourselves described? As heroes? Are you role models to other young people who are living behind the wall? We're a brother and sister who only want a chance for a better life, Fritz said. And to bring our family back together, I added. Please let us go. Forget you've seen us here. I am a uniformed officer of the state, and could no sooner forget that tunnel than forget my own name. His attention wandered upstairs as a gust of wind blew through the boards in the basement. It provided enough of a distraction that I wondered if Fritz and I could rush at him and overcome him, and then, well, I didn't know what. We weren't murderers, and we couldn't hold him here. We didn't even have enough money to offer him a respectable bribe. But we did have a tunnel. Mueller wore a gold wedding band on his left hand. He had a wife. On his left shoulder there was a small milk stain. From a burping baby, perhaps? He looked down into the tunnel again. Who else is coming with you? No one, I said. Half of East Germany could be lined up to come with us, and I'd still deny it. I wouldn't rat them out the way Frau Eberhard had done to us. What if others wanted to come? Top of page 197. Beside me, Fritz looked confused, perhaps wondering if that was a trap to get us to reveal other names. But I didn't think so. They'd be welcome, I said. You could... No, I couldn't. But from the tone of his voice, I knew Mueller had already thought about it, maybe even before he came here. That's why he'd come alone. His eyes flicked back to the tunnel, then over to me. I'll go up the ladder first. You will follow me next, and then your brother. If you try any tricks, I will bury you here. He turned to leave, but I darted forward to grab his arm, not to fight, but only to stop him from leaving. He reacted by shoving me to the ground and aiming his gun directly at me. I raised my hands in the air and closed my eyes tight, waiting for him to squeeze the trigger. Would you die for this tunnel? He yelled. Risk your lives, your family, for a run to the west? Don't shoot her, Fritz answered. This was my idea, not hers. I opened my eyes again to protest, but still felt paralyzed in the sights of his gun. At least he hadn't fired it yet. With a trembling voice, I said, Bring your family and come with us. Bring them to the west. Mueller's eyes widened. Escape? How dare you suggest that there is more for your family in the west? It's the life you would want for them if you could choose. Top of page 198. Okay, this is tense, you guys. Wow. Fritz caught on to my idea. You don't have to dig, but you might be able to keep other officers away from this area. Then, when we're ready to leave, we can put out a signal, letting you know that the tunnel is completed. Mueller wasn't convinced, but at least he was thinking. My wife wants to go to America. She has family there. We need another couple of weeks, Fritz said. Maybe more if we run into problems. But I can promise, with all my honor, to give you the chance to come. For the first time, Mueller lowered his gun. What's the signal, then? I spoke up. We'll leave a shovel in the dirt outside, a sign that we no longer need it. A long silence followed. Mueller spent most of it staring into the tunnel, and I wondered if he was picturing himself and his family running to freedom. I'd done that myself plenty of times. Finally, he said, I will write in my report that I investigated and saw nothing suspicious, but I may return tomorrow to arrest you. I tried to catch Fritz's eye to see what we should do. Mueller's terms were terrible. At best, he would do nothing to help, and at worst, he would get us killed. What other choice did we have, though? We had nothing else to bargain with. Fritz reached out a hand to shake Mueller's. Irritating me even more, he thanked Mueller. He actually thanked him for agreeing not to kill us. Yet, top of page 199. Mueller turned to leave and then said, Whatever I decide, you must hurry. With or without my help, this tunnel will be discovered soon. If I come with the group who discovers you, I will shoot just as quickly as the others. So do not look to me for sympathy in that moment. All I can do is warn you now. Your biggest enemy is time. I wasn't sure about that. Right now, Mueller seemed like a pretty big enemy to me. Fritz only nodded and said, "We're going to escape, and your family is welcome when we do. Watch for the shovel outside. We'll cross that same night." Woo! Okay, good times. We're going to jump right into chapter 31. Let's find out what happens. Okay, this is a quote from Otto von Bismarck, who was the creator of the German Empire. He said, "An appeal to fear never finds an echo in German hearts." Okay, so this is definitely showing the courage of the Germans, right? Fritz and I went straight home afterward. Mueller's visit had left both of us with legs of jelly, and nothing he had promised was very comforting. Okay, legs of jelly. What figurative language is that? Yeah, you could argue that it's an idiom, but best is probably that it's a metaphor, right? We're comparing the legs to what? To jelly, right? And we're not using the words like or as, so it's not a simile, it's a metaphor, right? And what is that saying when it's saying that their legs are made of jelly? Yeah, it's saying that they're so fearful. It's like, that feeling when your muscles feel weak because you're so nervous or you've been so stressed out and things like that. So the author is using this metaphor to explain that Fritz and Gerda have just been through the ringer and they are just feeling so on edge, right? Okay, as far as I was concerned, wherever we went now, his gun was still pointed our way. Another dreaded reality to add to my growing list of worries. As we walked home, Fritz pointed out the good news that Mueller would probably come with us for the escape. Otherwise, he could have just shot us there and earned himself a fine promotion for discovering that tunnel. Okay, that's a really good point from Fritz. There is a chance maybe Mueller is really considering coming with them because he would have gotten a lot of benefit from just turning them in or shooting them. I suppose that was how Fritz's and my thinking had evolved. The fact that we hadn't been shot and left to die was the morbid way in which we cheered ourselves up. We passed by a bakery offering old bread for a single Ostmark. Fritz said we could spare that much and bought some for each of us, which we munched on as we walked. Top of page 201, it was dry and wouldn't go very far in helping our hunger, but it was better than nothing. Frau Eberhard was in front of our apartments as we approached, so Fritz and I crossed the street and pretended to look in the storefronts there until she went inside. We'd go to any extreme to avoid her in the future. Okay, what have we just learned about Frau Eberhard? Now, she is an informant to the Stasi. Before the Lowe family was just worried about that, but Officer Mueller just confirmed, yeah, I heard about you from Frau Eberhard. She's been tattling on you. So now they know. It was a long night afterward for me. As tired as I felt, too much had happened that day with Anna and what was surely the final cut in our friendship. The broken shovel. And then Officer Mueller. If we had been found by anyone else, Fritz and I might be dead right now. Maybe that was still our fate. If Mueller could figure out what we were doing, others could too. It was only a matter of time. By morning, though, I felt a little better. We shared the last of what little food was in the apartment, and then reminded each other that a new shovel was more important than a full belly. After buying the shovel, we made our way to the Welcome Building. It looked just as it had the night before, but different to me somehow. Because now our secret wasn't ours alone, and any safety I had felt in working on this quiet, unused road was gone. Fritz rubbed my head. Today will be better, Goethe. I'm sure of it. I frowned back at him. There's a pit in my stomach. Well, there's nothing in mine, so consider yourself lucky. So he's got quite a sense of humor, right? He's saying, I'm starving to death. I'm so hungry. So you're lucky if there's a pit in your stomach. And of course, when she's saying there's a pit in her stomach, she's saying she feels very uneasy, right? Her stomach feels uneasy. Okay, top of page 202. I didn't like his joke. Not at all. I'm serious, Fritz. Something bad is going to happen. It's only leftover worries from yesterday. Fritz stared at me a moment too long, as if trying to convince himself of his own words. Now, let's get to work. Things went fine for a few hours. I was in the garden, clearing more weeds, and had already emptied out a lot of the dirt from the basement. So remember, since they've been telling people that they're working on a garden, they have to keep up that facade and, keep pulling weeds and stuff. So it's like they're doing double the work. They're digging this huge tunnel at the same time that they're also keeping up appearances that they have a garden. So lots of work that these two are doing. But then I saw Fritz at the basement window, hissing at me to come inside and to hurry. His eyes were so wide I could see the whites from here. Oh no, what's happened? The reason for the pit in my gut. I dropped the spade and hurried for the building, careful not to make it look like anything was unusual, if anyone was watching. But when I ducked inside, Fritz had already returned to the shelter, and I breathlessly raced to follow. "What's the matter?" I called while descending the ladder. My answer came as soon as I entered the tunnel. Water trickled beneath my feet and sank into the soil, creating a dense mud. The farther I walked, the more water there was. At the back of the tunnel, Fritz had exposed a pipe that was now spurting out pressurized water like a fireman's hose. The hole in it wasn't large, but it was enough to cause significant damage and was getting worse. Okay, I'm not going to keep pointing out the rising action, but this event right here, you guys, now they've got this trouble with the water squirting into the tunnel. What do we call this again in an event like this that adds to the conflict? Rising action. So here's a rising action event. Okay. The streams of water tore dirt from the walls and sent it in chunks to the ground. Our tunnel was flooding, and if we didn't find a way to stop the water, it would collapse entirely. 203. How did this happen? I cried. I nicked it with the shovel. Didn't even know it was there until water shot out at me. What do we do? Fritz wrapped his hands around the pipe, which helped, but water leaked down his arms, and we knew it would burst again as soon as he let go. Maybe even break open and flood the entire tunnel before we could escape. I have an idea, he said, but it'll take some time to get what we need. You have to stay here and hold this pipe. How long? I can't. However long it takes. Come on, Goethe. You can do this. So I stood on tiptoes, then reached up and replaced my hands with his. The water pushed at me with a force I didn't expect, and it took effort to keep my grip on the pipe. Hurry, I told him. Just hurry. He ran from the tunnel and left me in absolute darkness. The flashlight was somewhere at my feet, but already buried in mud, and I couldn't let go to search for it. The water dripping down my hands was cold, and the wetter I became, the more I shivered. Fritz said it would take him some time. How long did that mean? An hour? 2 hours? Until evening? Oh, wow. Okay, so I'm having a text-to-text connection here. So she's holding this pipe, right, and trying to keep it from leaking the water. And this reminds me of an old folk tale. In fact, I think it might be based on a true story of a boy in Holland who, in Holland they have a lot of water that they have to put up barriers that kind of block the water and keep it from flooding the city. And this one boy notices that there's a hole spurting water one day, and he has to hold his finger in that water, and he has to make sure that it doesn't leak. And he has to stand there for hours in order to save the village. So that's a text-to-text connection that I don't know if you've heard that old tale. That's an old-fashioned one from a long time ago, but I'm making a text-to-text connection there. So maybe you can think of a text-to-text connection where you can compare what's going on in the situation, a big emergency situation, and somebody has to be really tough, right? Like she might be standing there in this cold water down in this dark tunnel for hours, okay? All right. I couldn't hold on until evening, with water still dripping from the pipe. I wasn't even sure the tunnel would be here that long. If it collapsed, it'd take me with it. Top of page 204. In the darkness, a chunk of dirt or maybe rock fell somewhere behind me. I instinctively ducked, protecting myself from whatever might fall next. It terrified me to wonder how much had just fallen, and if more was about to come down. The only thing I knew for sure was that the mud at my feet was getting deeper. Oh dear. Occasionally, when my hold slipped, water would spurt at harsh angles, inevitably bringing down more chunks of dirt. And at one point, it loosened a rock overhead. I heard something start to fall and backed away from the sound, but when it came down, it grazed my arm. From the sting, I was sure it gave me a deep cut, though I couldn't remove my hands from the pipe to check it. It wasn't much longer before I was entirely soaked through. My wet clothes clung to my body. My feet were sinking in mud, and my hair was in my face and over my eyes, but I supposed it didn't matter because there was nothing I could see in here anyway. I was shivering, and my fingers and toes were already numb. But I knew if I let go of the pipe, everything we had worked so hard for was finished. So I held on, doing whatever I could to distract myself. I solved long division problems, recited poems, and prayed for a stronger willpower, though it'd be the last trait my mother would want me to strengthen. When those didn't work, I sang songs in my head. Ironically, the only ones I could think of were the patriotic songs of the pioneers. Okay, remember, the pioneers is that group that she had to join at school where they're actually teaching her communist propaganda, right? So she's not loving that the only songs she can think of are from her pioneers group. But their rousing, top of page 205, but their rousing tunes didn't help for long. Time was crawling by, and I'd lost any sense of how long Fritz had been gone. Was it an hour? Was it more? He would come back. I was sure of that. Unless he had been arrested for some reason. Maybe Frau Eberhardt had caused us trouble again. She was obviously capable of it. Or what if the tunnel was already collapsing from the outside? Maybe that's why it was so dark in here and why he hadn't come back. Maybe he couldn't. That terrified me, and I tried to shake the worst thoughts from my mind. All I knew was that Fritz had said to hold on, so I held to the pipe and to my senses and to my courage, bundling them together and knotting them within my heart. I closed my eyes and repeated his last words to me. Come on, Goethe, you can do this. Fritz did return eventually. I wasn't sure it was him at first, not until I heard his voice calling for me. Where's the flashlight? He asked. Somewhere below me. It fell. Fritz dug for that first, and when the light finally returned to the tunnel, I began breathing easier. He was fine, and I would be after a while. But for now, I was exhausted and freezing, and my numb hands ached from the pressure and the cold. I'd held them up for so long, I doubted any blood was left in them. Top of page 206. What happened to your arm? He asked. With the light on it, I saw the cut was much worse than I had expected. It ran in a long, jagged line that would probably leave a scar and stung like it had been attacked by wasps, but at least it wasn't bleeding anymore. I shrugged it off and asked, What do you have for the pipe? Not much, but it'll have to do. Fritz held up a clamp and an empty bicycle tube. Papa once fixed a pipe in our apartment this way. It's not permanent, but it will work for now. Where'd you get those? The clamp came from Herr Kraus. Remember, that's their other neighbor. He had a few people at his place for some sort of meeting, so he told me to go in his back room and take what I needed from his gadget collection. Didn't ask any other questions. The bicycle tube came from Claudia. She has extras in the shop where she works, and I hope she wouldn't ask questions either. Okay, who's Claudia, guys? Yeah, that's Fritz's girlfriend. Claudia? Your girlfriend? Ex-girlfriend, remember? Now, move your hand. Okay, why is she his ex-girlfriend? Yeah, her dad will not allow her to date Fritz anymore ever since they have found out that the Stasi is after them and they have a file on Fritz, right? Okay, now move your hand. It's going to spurt water, but I've got to wrap this tube around the leak. I obeyed and caught a powerful spray of water to my face before Fritz got the tube over it. But he pulled it tight and then began wrapping it around the pipe. With every layer, the water sealed up tighter. Hand me the clamp, he said. It's in my back pocket. I grabbed the clamp, and while he worked to get it, top of page 207, while he worked to get it pinched around the pipe, I said, What do you mean you hoped Claudia wouldn't ask questions? Did she? He paused for only a moment and then said, I went into her shop filthy and wet, and you and I are both thinner than we ought to be right now. Yeah, she had questions. What did you tell her? Only about the garden. I said I fell into the pond and that we needed the bicycle tube to prop up some plants. And did she believe you? Fritz finished sealing the clamp and then patted at the pipe. When he was convinced the leak was fixed, he glanced down at me and said, "Probably not, but she used to like me. I hope it'll be okay." That wasn't good enough, not after all our other close calls. But as things became more dangerous, simply hoping for anything good was probably the best we could do. All right, make sure that you take great notes. Wow, so much has occurred. Okay, we'll see you at chapter 32.